Welcome to British Focus, your go-to channel for the latest political developments and in-depth discussions on the most pressing issues affecting the UK. If you haven't already, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to stay updated with our fast-growing community. Now, let's get straight into today's story. A major controversy is unfolding over the Chagos Islands deal, as accusations of misleading statements, lack of proper consultation, and questionable negotiations shake the political landscape. At the center of this storm is David Lammy, facing intense scrutiny from campaigners, politicians, and even former government ministers. The controversy stems from claims that the Labour government has kept the Chagossian people informed throughout negotiations. However, critics argue this is far from the truth, with many voices accusing Lammy of misrepresenting key facts in Parliament. The situation is escalating, and the pressure is mounting. What really happened behind closed doors? Stay tuned as we break it all down. David Lammy, the Labour Shadow Foreign Secretary, is in the eye of a political storm. He stands accused of misleading Parliament over the Chagos Islands deal, a deal that was already controversial from the start. And now, with new claims emerging, the credibility of both Lammy and the Labour government is being called into question. So, what exactly has happened? It all started when Chagossian Voices, a campaign group representing the interests of the Chagossian people, sent a legal letter to the Foreign Secretary. The letter came after Labour MP Peter Lamb suggested that Lammy's statements in the House of Commons were not truthful. The accusation? That Lammy claimed the UK government had kept the Chagossians fully informed throughout negotiations. But let's pause for a second here, because if that were true, why would Chagossian Voices be demanding answers? Why would they challenge the government's narrative in such a public, legally aggressive manner? Clearly, something doesn't add up. The situation escalated when James Cleverly, the former Conservative Foreign Secretary, doubled down on criticism of Labour's handling of the negotiations. Cleverly made a stark contrast between his approach and that of the current Labour team, stating that he always maintained firm red lines during talks. According to him, Labour dramatically changed the UK's position, weakening its bargaining power and ultimately handing over too much to Mauritius. And here's where it gets interesting. Cleverly claims that this lack of strong negotiation tactics has encouraged Mauritius to keep asking for more money and additional concessions. Now, let's break this down. Mauritius is not going to stop pushing for more advantages if it senses weakness in Britain's stance. This is exactly what happens when a government fails to take a firm position in international negotiations. If Cleverly's claims are correct, Labour ministers have not only given Mauritius the upper hand but have also left the UK looking weak on the global stage. Yet, despite the growing outrage, Downing Street is standing by its position. A government spokesperson has insisted that the priority has always been to protect British and US strategic interests. But that raises another question. If the government truly believes this, why do so many voices, including former ministers and campaign groups, believe that the Chagos Islands deal is a disaster? Now, let's get into the legal ramifications of all this. The letter from Chagossian Voices demands that Lammy correct the parliamentary record and clarify statements that the group insists were demonstrably false. And that's not all. It also calls on the government to directly engage with the Chagossian people, rather than making politically expedient decisions without proper consultation. This is where things get really damning. Chagossian Voices has now sought legal action to challenge the agreement, arguing that the Foreign Office Minister, Stephen Doughty, has refused to engage with them. In fact, the group claims that they haven't even met with David Lammy, the very man who insists the government has been open and communicative with them. If these allegations are true, then the Labour government's credibility is hanging by a thread. But Labour insists it has done everything right. Lammy himself has attempted to defend his position by arguing that it's difficult to get a single, unified view from the Chagossian community due to their geographical dispersion. That may be a fair point, but it does not excuse the apparent lack of transparency in this process. If Labour truly wanted to support the Chagossians, surely they would have done more to engage with them directly rather than making decisions behind closed doors. The controversy over the deal has been simmering since its announcement in October, with negotiations dragging on for months. Now, fresh concerns have emerged about international risks associated with the agreement. And here's where things take an even more dramatic turn. There is growing speculation that former US President Donald Trump could intervene and veto the agreement. Why? Because Washington is deeply concerned about the possibility of China and Iran gaining access to the vital UK-US airbase on Diego Garcia. This raises serious security questions. If the agreement compromises the strategic importance of the base, it could have major repercussions not just for the UK, but for global security. The possibility of hostile nations gaining influence in such a sensitive area cannot be ignored. Meanwhile, back in the UK, the political backlash is intensifying. Marc Francois, the Shadow Armed Forces Minister, has called the agreement a complete disaster. He is urging Lammy to scrap the entire deal, warning that it risks undermining Britain's global standing and damaging UK defence interests. Despite the mounting criticism, Lammy is holding firm, insisting that the agreement is the best possible outcome and secures the future of the Diego Garcia airbase. But that argument has failed to convince his critics, especially when we consider that the International Court of Justice ruled that the Chagos Islands belong to Mauritius. This ruling adds another layer of complication to an already chaotic situation. If the UK government is seen as ignoring international law, it will only add fuel to the fire and damage Britain's diplomatic credibility even further. So, what do you think? Has Labour completely mismanaged the Chagos Islands negotiations? Has David Lammy misled Parliament? And should the UK really be handing over control of such a strategically important territory? In other news, the latest projections from the Office for National Statistics, ONS, reveal a staggering shift in the UK's demographic landscape. Over the next 7 years, the UK population is expected to increase by nearly 5 million, reaching 72.5 million by 2032. What's driving this growth? Migration, almost entirely. Now, let's pause for a moment. This is not just a statistic, it's a fundamental transformation of British society. The natural balance of births and deaths is expected to remain largely stable, with 6.8 million births and 6.8 million deaths over the period. So, if the number of people being born and passing away is essentially the same, then the only reason the population is increasing so dramatically is because of net migration. And here's where things get really interesting. James Robards, head of population and household projections at the ONS, has stated that migration is the sole driver of this growth. But that's not all. He also highlighted an alarming aging trend in the population. By 2047, the number of people aged over 85 will have doubled, putting an enormous strain on public services such as healthcare and pensions. Let's think about that for a second. An aging population means more pressure on the NHS, more demand for elderly care, and a shrinking workforce to support it all. This creates a double-edged dilemma. We need workers to sustain the economy, yet we also need to ensure that immigration is managed responsibly, balancing economic necessity with social cohesion. Now, here's something that might surprise you. England is set to grow faster than any other part of the UK, with an expected 7.8% increase in population by 2032. Compare that to Wales at 5.9%, Scotland at 4.4%, and Northern Ireland at just 2.1%, and you begin to see a clear pattern. England is absorbing the bulk of the migration influx, and that will undoubtedly reshape the social and political landscape in the coming years. And let's not forget the long-term picture. Looking ahead 25 years, the ONS predicts that the UK population will grow by 8.9 million, an increase of 13.2%. While this growth rate is slightly lower than the previous 25 years, it still raises serious questions about housing, infrastructure, education, and public services. So, what does this all mean for the future of Britain? Will immigration continue to be the defining issue of the next decade? Can the government manage these shifts effectively, or are we heading for an unsustainable future? These are the questions that demand real answers. Let us know what you think in the comments. Should the UK embrace this population boom, or should stricter controls be put in place? As always, if you found this analysis insightful, hit the like button and subscribe to British Focus for more hard-hitting discussions on the most pressing issues facing the country. In other news, Meghan Markle is once again making headlines, but not for the reasons she might have hoped. Her much-anticipated podcast series has been delayed yet again, marking yet another setback for the Duchess of Sussex's media ventures. This follows the postponement of her Netflix lifestyle series, With Love, Meghan, which was originally set to launch sooner but has now been pushed back to March 4th. The official reason? Meghan is reportedly focusing on relief efforts for wildfire victims in California. Now, let's take a step back and examine this situation. On the surface, it sounds like an honorable cause, helping those in need, supporting communities devastated by wildfires, and prioritizing humanitarian work over personal projects. And yet, as always with Meghan Markle, there are skeptics. Many are questioning whether this is a genuine act of goodwill or another carefully curated PR move. According to Hello magazine, the decision to delay her podcast series aligns with Meghan and Harry's recent charity work in California. The couple has been seen distributing food parcels, comforting evacuees, and actively engaging with wildfire relief efforts in Pasadena. Admirable, right? But here's where it gets complicated. Some critics argue that every move they make is designed for maximum media exposure. Let's not forget, this wouldn't be the first time Meghan and Harry's charitable efforts have come under scrutiny. Their Africa documentary, the Archewell Foundation initiatives, even their visit to Uvalde after the school shooting, all have been met with mixed reactions. Some see them as two people trying to make a difference. Others see calculated PR stunts meant to rehabilitate their image. And that brings us to the bigger question. Why do Meghan's media projects keep getting delayed? Is this purely about timing and priorities, or is there something more going on behind the scenes? We know their Spotify deal collapsed after just one season of Archetypes, with reports claiming that Meghan and Harry failed to deliver content that met expectations. Their Netflix documentary series was a one-time spectacle, but beyond that, their media empire hasn't really taken off as expected. Could it be that Meghan is struggling to sustain public interest in her personal projects? Have audiences grown tired of the never-ending Sussex drama? Or is this just a temporary delay before a strong comeback? Another interesting aspect of this situation is Meghan's direct response to critics. After being accused of using the wildfires as a publicity tool, she made an additional visit to a women's shelter, bringing food and beauty products for those affected. A touching gesture, no doubt, but was this damage control? Was this her way of saying, "Look, I really do care"? Or was it simply a sincere effort to support vulnerable women in crisis? Regardless of where you stand on Meghan Markle, one thing is certain: she knows how to keep the world talking. Whether it's through philanthropy, controversy, or high-profile delays, Meghan and Harry remain one of the most polarizing couples in modern media. So, what do you think? Is Meghan genuinely prioritizing charity work over her media career, or is this yet another strategic PR move? Has the public lost interest in her projects, or will she come back stronger than ever? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this discussion, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to British Focus for more insights into the biggest stories shaping the UK and beyond. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.